similar to a Taldazar, where like it's just really quick-paced dungeon where you do these massive pulls, and if you screw up just one of them, it's pretty much taking on Perplexed in this dungeon. They have to play completely perfectly and pull out some insane strat that they pulled off since Time Trials a week ago.
Yeah, we've seen a number of times where, a lot of the time trial dungeons are also really heavily featured throughout some of the lower bracket games. So with that in mind, there still is a lot of opportunity for them to practice, and they also just have more information and more knowledge of some of these dungeons now than they did at the beginning of the season. So let's see what we got as Perplexed and Pitu's Angels are already underway in the Necrotic Wake.
All right, so it looks like Perplexed already gathered up their very first pull where they gather everything on top of the boss. And they changed something up a little here because Ryzen is the one who actually activates the Goliath here. We usually saw the rogues go there and activate it and then throwing the spear as well onto the boss. But it looks like Perplexed changing it up a little, having their priest do that, which means the rogue can put out more damage onto this pack. And it looks like everything is just exploding. Look how much damage the rogue and the mage are doing onto this very first AoE pack. You see the pride is in there as well, as they're already up to 27% trash. They're healing themselves up with the Kyrian buff, the orbs, the anima exhaust that all the players picked up now. And that's why they can just do this boss plus pride plus all of the trash. But this is incredibly difficult. If any small thing goes wrong, it's gonna mean it's an instant full team wipe, and it's also a huge amount of time lost if you don't play this properly.
Yeah, and you can see that Pitu's Angels have completely finished their first pull, but they are just now engaging the boss. They didn't actually pull the boss in on that first pull, so Perplexed already, right off the bat, huge advantage in this section of the dungeon already. And you can see where that 6-minute time advantage from Time Trials is coming into play. They just kind of combine everything together, whereas Pitu's is opting to kind of split everything up and go a little bit safer with their pulls.
Yeah, and now we see them already activate that second Goliath here on Perplexed side as they're gathering up their second trash pool. There's still an orb on the left side that they haven't picked up yet. They're going to be using it for further pulls. So far for this one, they only need that Kyrian orb, that anima exhaust. As you can see, everyone is stacking up on top of the mobs, making sure they do get that pulsing AoE damage onto it. And we also have Spiteful here, as you can see. That's why it's pretty nice if they kill everything at the same time, because they do have the double melee setup with the Rogue and the Windwalker. So if something dies a lot faster than the rest, then you have these Spitefuls that the melees have to dodge and kite, which can cause a pretty big damage loss. That's why they try to kill everything pretty evenly.
Yep, for sure. And wow, Perplexed already dealing with their second Prideful. We know from what we've seen in previous weeks that the plan is now to go for yet another massive pull right after this with the weapons they have available to them, getting them to their 60% Prideful and probably getting to them to roughly 70% of their trash percentage, which is all they need before going up to the final trash of the dungeon, the third and fourth boss later on. But yeah, this should be it. One final massive AoE pull here for Perplexed, and then they're on to the second boss, whereas Pitu's Angels is just now starting to get through that Necromancer section of the dungeon that Perplexed just finished dealing with.
Yeah, they're now gathering the mini boss plus the whole trash area. You can see almost everything being pulled on top here. This is also one of those pulls that we've seen teams struggle with before. Ashan is going to be doing a lot of damage soon. He's just waiting to get his anima orb off. I assume that he is going to be using it here as a divine field. Swagfist actually getting feared. They didn't have an interrupt on one of those AoEs from the skeletons, so they want to make sure that they get back up track. But divine field dropping so low. Let's see if he can recover as he's just running away, kiting, even picking up the shield and just channeling the shield to get the damage reduction, but he's going down. He just doesn't manage to recover. Not sure if they can finish off these mobs here. It looks like they were just missing quite a bit of damage here. Maybe one of the weapons wasn't being used fast enough. Not sure what happened.
Well, Swagfist is able to get the res off here, but everything's so spread out, it's going to be really difficult for Divine Field to actually get aggro on everything. With Wolf Disco also dead, this is going to be a lot slower, but the fact that they're able to somehow pull this together and not instantly massively wipe as a team is pretty impressive, I feel like. Swagfist does have that debuff on him. You can see that it's actually absorbing more than his entire health pool, and with Ryzen in the corner there, it's going to be difficult for them to actually get out of this. I wonder if Ryzen's actually just trying to stay out of combat just in case they do wipe here, because they don't really need his healing to actually finish off this pull.
Yeah, they all shadow melted, as you can see. Everyone except Wolf Disco, who uses invisibility, just resetting the pull here. They figured they're not going to be able to finish this off properly. I do assume that was just something that went wrong with the weapons, because it looked like the fear went off. A Shine did not really do a lot of damage at the start. Maybe he couldn't use the orb. Maybe his stealth got broken because, of course, he's using the legendary that gives him crit whenever he gets out of stealth to make sure the weapons do a lot more damage. But maybe something broke his stealth, didn't have Vanish or something available to get the second activation off. Not sure what exactly happened, but they decided to just completely reset the pool. Everyone shadow melted off the aggro, and now they have to play it really slowly, though. They did, fortunately, finish off some of the mobs. But as you can see, everything is quite a lot slower if you can't do those huge pulls with the weapons.
And while it did look like a tragedy for Perplexed, on the other hand, over on the side of Pitu's Angels, there was an entire team wipe in that second prideful area of the dungeon where we saw Perplexed having no issues earlier on. So the fact that Perplexed was able to power through and not have any major wipe there, just kind of some couple trickle deaths and have to deal with some kiting some ads, they were able to save a lot of time there and kind of saved the dungeon for them. So Pitu's Angels massively behind now. Perplexed can actually just honestly play super safe for the rest of the dungeon and they'll be fine here.
Yeah, looks like it. And I did now just see what happened earlier. I think the fear going off was the one thing that just made it go wrong, because Ashine got feared as well with the weapon, and then the whole pool just spread out. And of course, if everything is spread, then the orb is not going to be doing even damage. And yeah, so one kick missing on that pool just caused them to have this the whole thing going wrong. But they are now recovered, of course, as they're finishing off this Pride, the 60% Pride, and they only have 2 deaths on the board, which, to be honest, is pretty impressive considering that their whole pool went wrong. So well done for them to recover this whole pool as they're now slowly clearing the rest of the trash bags here without having any of those weapons. Of course, it's a little bit slower, but they still managed to get it done as Pitu's Angels struggling a little as they're up to 5 deaths, 25 seconds behind with those death timers. And yeah, you can see the difference in pulls when you do not, when you don't want to risk those huge weapon pulls, then of course everything is just quite a bit slower. It is less risky, but with Perplexed having a mistake on their huge pull, they're still ahead because of the amount of time they're saving with these crazy pulls.
Yeah, and I mean, you got to remember as well that there's the kind of added in change that happened about a month ago or so now that the players are now playing with, where when you die with a weapon, you don't lose the weapon anymore. So if you do have a huge mistake on some pull, you can just opt to not use the weapons, wipe, and then you still have them available for the pull afterwards. Like, and we saw on that setup for Perplexed that they had some really big issues there. They weren't getting everything stacked up together. That's why we saw, Ashine just kind of waiting to use the weapon there. And your tank's not supposed to tank that pull for more than like 20 seconds, right? So that's why we saw those mistakes happening. So I'm not really sure, what the issue was for them there. We'll have to see if we have something there from our analyst later on. But yeah, it was that's kind of one of the things that we've talked about a lot in the past. Is one of the attributes these top teams tend to have is that even though they make a mistake, they're often able to make the best of that mistake and kind of not end up having a full wipe from it, which is what we saw happen to Perplexed here. Yeah,
but it looks like they overlapped SSC here on the Reanimated Mage. They used Blind and Incap. It's also not something you want to see. Of course, you do want to CC 2 different ones, because whenever the final harvest of this boss goes off, any CC'd ads will not actually explode onto the raid, so you do not want to stack the CC. But looks like Amarth might just go down before the final harvest. Never mind, it is going to be casting through, so you can see the mage just dying, not doing anything to the group. And once Amarth is down, they do have no battle rests left. And there's quite a few difficult pulls that are still going to be happening in this necropolis in the next area. So definitely want to be careful that they don't have any more of those mistakes that we've seen them do before, because they're out of these battle rests, and they're out of maybe even some weapons that they had to use before.
Yep, for sure. And I mean, what we see a lot from these teams now is, before they like to snap this trash down to the bottom, but now they just decided they want to pull all of it with their weapons up here. There's a little bit of setup here. You can see Dr. Wolf Disco polymorphing that fleshcraft. They're going to be using that to deal with their 80% prideful. And here we go. The entire room is being pulled. Probably see a silent sigil coming out from the tank. Oh, actually, We're just using the ice block to stack everything up. Very smart.
I like it.
We've seen this used a lot in the pack. Of course, when you ice block like that, everything decides to run to you instead of cast on you. So that's a very perfect execution there. And of course, the grip sigil, silent sigil can come out, leg sweep, and then the weapons just go ahead and blow everything up. You can see the massive 250k DPS burst coming out of Ashine. And then, of course, they just have to kite out the Spitefuls afterwards. Just beautiful execution there. And now they have the Fleshcrafter to deal with this manifestation of pride if they wanted to.
Yeah, this is a very smart way of gathering everything up. We've seen those teams try different stuff. We saw the tank just jumping around, gathering up everything, but then it takes quite a while for everything to be gathered, and the tanks are taking a lot of damage while they're gathering it. And then we've also seen the rogues try to do it as well, which also wasn't the best strat, and we've seen some rogues go down doing so as well. But having the mage gather up everything and then just ice block in the middle until everything is there is pretty nice. So I really like the strategy coming out of Perplexed, as they are now still seeing the Fleshcrafter in the corner. So the Fleshcrafter helped them out with the Pride, and now they're seeing it again, probably using it for the next Pride and for the Stitchworks from the next couple of trash packs. So I really like them just saving this Fleshcrafter to throw the axes onto the enemies.
Yep, for sure. It's a really good strategy. And also, if they actually have their 100% without the Fleshcrafter, they can just use it on the boss too. It's just free damage, right? So it's actually really good for them to just keep that up. It's so much free damage for them. So, of course, they have now reached the point where they've dealt with all of the available trash, and now they just have to deal with this final sort of on-rails section of the dungeon, deal with these 2 assistants first, and then you'll have to deal with 2 of Surgeon Touchflesh's major minions as well. And then you're on to the 3rd and 4th boss, and you can see just how far Perplexed is at this point. Peach's Angel is still dealing with that final trash pack in the room, and they're doing a pretty good job, actually, so far. They're just now dealing with the rest of the trash, and Caster cursed them as night goes down, and it's going to be a full team wipe for them. So scrap everything that I said. Perplexed is probably going to be taking this first dungeon.
Yeah, that was a bit unfortunate, as their tank went down there and they didn't manage to rest him back up. They don't have any rest classes, and an engineering rest just takes quite a while, and you have to be in melee range to the corpse to be able to get them back up, and they just didn't manage, and everything just fell apart with the Pride pulsing AoE in the group as well while all of this was happening. So unfortunate for them, as they have to just recover and go back up, while Perplexed is up to 94% trash. Of course, they only have to deal with those last 2 trash packs, this left one that they're almost done with, and then also the right trash pack that is just spawning as soon as you're done with the left. So nothing they can really do to speed up these trash pulls here, as this is like this event, basically, that only starts spawning as soon as you finish the previous one. But they still have this Fleshcrafter alive. It just now died. So they actually got quite a bit of value out of these cleavers. So well done by Perplexed to be able to do this so quickly. You can look at the time, 12 minutes 21. That's the time that the number 2 and number 2 teams, so Perplexed and Echo, had in the time trials. So at this point, the dungeon actually would be over already if they would have played it perfectly and they didn't make the mistake earlier on.
Right. And I mean, they probably lost a solid 1.5 to 2 minutes from that pull alone. And that's just the volatility of this dungeon, right? I think our first cup, we had I think a 21-minute time was pretty good in Necrotic Wake. Then last week we had like 15-minute, 60-minute times, and now we're down to 12 minutes, which is just ridiculous. Like I said it earlier on, this kind of the Ataldazar now of this expansion in this MDI, which with how fast the teams are able to just put together these massive pulls. And the volatility of that goes to show you just how difficult this actually is to pull off for the teams. I mean, even small things like this, making sure you have the Prideful in the corner, everyone has their potion off cooldown so they can invisit and get onto the boss. Really difficult to do, actually, in practice. It's why they have to put so much practice in to get these pulls down perfectly.
Yeah, and when you have these kind of dungeon speeds, these clears, right, then we also have to talk about Bloodlust usage as well. I remember when we had Freehold and Ataldazar times, they were almost like close to 10 minutes. We saw some teams only use 1 single Bloodlust the whole dungeon long, saving it for like the last pull or saving it for a huge pull. So it's really interesting to see that we're getting really close to those times already, and this is just the start of Shadowlands, so this is just going to get faster with those teams. We'll see what they can do later on, but yeah, just incredible to see Perplexed just speed through this dungeon as they're fighting Surgeon Stitchflesh now. It looks like they're not using too many cooldowns for this boss, because you can get the boss back down from the platform immediately as soon as you just aim the third cleaver from the at into the boss again. So the boss jumps back up and he's coming back down almost immediately. So that's why none of these MDI teams are actually committing too many cooldowns for this boss, and they're saving most of their weapons that they still have for the last boss to save a lot more time there.
And I wonder if they had to commit more of their weapons to that pole that they ended up having to kite out a lot, because usually we see this second boss go down a lot faster than what we just saw, right? So I wonder if they just had to use those early on and they didn't have any weapons available for it. Because usually Surge and Stitch Flesh gets completely blown up by your rogue or your mage with weapons as well. So really interesting to see that they had to make some little on-the-fly adjustments to their routing here. Now, of course, I think the Prideful is pretty normal, right? You want to have the Prideful so that you can blow up this last boss before he sends too many people down, or before you run out of immunities for the Exile. But yeah, I think it's pretty normal here. And Perplexed, even though it's not the cleanest run, they should be able to take this first dungeon and kind of cement their legacy here so far this year as being the #1 seeded team from Time Trials and playing decently well, right? It's not perfect, but being able to take that terrible situation and only get 2 deaths out of it is pretty good.
Definitely, and one thing that we have to mention as well is that they actually changed this boss here, that you cannot avoid the Exile cast anymore. Previously, you were able to immune it by using Ice Block, but you were also able to just Shadow Melt off the cast completely. So that is something that you can't necessarily do anymore. Looks like it's still possible. Just kidding. So it looks like they can still Shadow Melt, but it only delays the cast. So it looks like it's just delaying the cast instead of completely avoiding it. So they'll still get the Exile eventually, but it looks like they're just having so much damage with the Bloodlust as well, and the weapons that they had, and the Pride buff, that they're just finishing off the boss really quickly and winning that first game against Pitu's Angels.
That's right, Perplexed taking that victory despite some mistakes. But if ever there were really a time for, the nerves to kind of set in and them kind of get back into that tournament flow, it's got to be that first game as they take that victory and they're able to make up for some of those errors here, Dranos.
Yeah, I mean, this is a dungeon where every single team I think we've seen have stuff go wrong, and obviously it's good to try and have that happen as few Necrotic Wake runs as possible, but if you want to be a team that wins, you're going to have some runs where stuff goes wrong, and I think credit to Perplexed, they handled things going wrong very well, and they managed to do that to avoid that spiraling into the run being a complete disaster.
Yeah, and you're like you mentioned, we've always seen so many different teams try to be able to pull it off perfectly, and it's so easy for these mistakes to be made. We even saw them going for the shield. We always talk about the weapons, Nagura, but we never see the shield getting grabbed, and that's got to be such a testament to how desperate they were to be able to survive.
Yeah, first I was like, what is he doing there? And then I realized, he picked up the shield. He's channeling the shield. But yeah, that's really just something he's doing when something's going wrong, for sure, right?
I'm going to be honest, I don't know what that shield does. I've never seen it picked up
I think you just
before.
channel it, and it's like an AoE damage reduction while it's being channeled. But
you can't do anything else, so you're not dodging or parrying or anything like that. And even from a healer perspective, I've tried to pick it up a couple times, and they still take so much damage that you immediately just have to drop it and then just start spamming them, and they start taking more damage. It's just a nightmare. But GG's to Perplexed for taking that first victory. Buff shield. That's a campaign I can get around.
Yeah.
And it's going to put us into the other side for the next game on this one. So we haven't seen that from Time Trials, though, as well, Zyro. What are some of the kind of expectations that we might be looking for from that dungeon with Inspiring and Storming, Tyrannical as well?
Man, those are some nasty affixes. I don't know if the Inspiring really does too much, right? Because you're still going to just mass pull the sort of the Ardenweld section, right? So I don't think that changes your routing too much. I think you just have to kind of blow up the trash packs. More emphasis on making sure you deal with the inspired mob first, so you can actually deal with some of the kicks, especially on the Hakar wing. I don't think it should be too different from previous weeks, though. We should probably see similar times. Just gonna have to see more focus on either CCing inspired mobs or just making sure they get blown up quickly.
Yeah, we've seen how much a lot of these teams as well, Dranos, when it comes to routing, have looked at the Mechagon wing as one of the areas they want to be able to skip, and they have the Hakar wing they really have to worry about as well. So before we get into that, let's start talking about some of those gigantic wipes that we saw on the side of Necrotic Wake, though.
Sure, yeah. So you turn back to Necrotic Wake, and then we'll get back over to the other side. I wanted to show the way that Perplexed handled this very first pull as something. This is actually an evolution for them. This is a pull that has caused them problems in the past. It's been one of the pulls where we've seen them wipe or almost wipe before, but this was actually handled so beautifully by them this time. They were able to just nuke everything down so quickly. Where things fell apart was this the second trash pull of the dungeon, where we saw fears coming out, and then we fell behind on dispels, right? Dispel one fear, a member of the group still feared, and that means the next hit goes through, and then the fears start kind of chain casting. And in a pull like that, once one thing gets disrupted, you usually have committed all of your resources that you might normally have to like save a pull, and so all the other things will start going wrong as a result because you just don't have enough resources. And there was that, of course, very cool run in, ice block, be the only person in combat. Crucial to be the only person in combat. If you're attempting something like this on the live servers, if you're that mage, you can't have like a hot on you, because if the healer gets in combat as well, those mobs are going to just ignore your ice block and they're going to run and murder your healer. But if you can just go in there and stay out of combat with the rest of the group, then you can get all those mobs nicely grouped up for just the cost of one low ice block.
That's right. Yeah, and I was kind of curious as well with some of the running that we saw at that point. So it looked like they just kind of outranged the healer, trying to get away in before the second boss as well. Wasn't sure how much room they'd actually have to be able to kite away if they were able to get like the grip off or something. But it seemed like it was just running the exact opposite way of where the healer was at, and it wasn't able to catch up.
Yeah, I mean, it really seemed like there was just some missed CC or miscommunication there. Like we talked about it a little bit during the cast, right? You're not supposed to take that pull for more than like 15 or 20 seconds. So when your cooldowns run out, you're like, oh, well, what do I do now? And we saw what happened there. Your tank is just going to die if you don't blow up that pull.
Yeah, most definitely. And now we'll start going back as well, Dratnos, to the other side conversation. A lot of people have been skipping Mechagon Wings. We've seen Ardenweald making up the majority of enemy forces percentage. Hakar seems like it might be maybe even the inner ring most impactful with inspiring affix coming up here.
Yeah, I think the sequencing is an interesting thing to point out as well, because Perplexed have really been the only team to stick with this kind of right side first strategy, whereas almost every team in our second cup had switched over to the left strategy. So I think it'll be interesting to see. First of all, I expect Perplexed will probably stick with that plan, but maybe they won't. Maybe they'll have found a way that left is better than right. And then it'll be interesting to see what all the other teams do, because, of course, Perplexed looked really, really strong in this dungeon last cup. So maybe there's something about their strategy that other teams can incorporate as well.
Most definitely, as game number 2 is ready to get underway. Also, important to note as well, Nagur, on this one, we do have that nerfed form of Tyrannical, just like the previous week as well. So these bosses have a bit less HP, but still very, very dangerous bosses in this instance.
Yeah, definitely. And you have a lot of bosses here as well that last a really long time. So looks like nothing too fancy with their setup, though. We saw some innovations in this dungeon specifically with the Holy Paladins and Shadow Priests, but none of that here between Perplexed and Pitu's Angels, as they're sticking to this more meta comp with the DK, the Mage, and the Windwalker. And both teams also doing the same skip with that slow fall as they're jumping to the left side, just skipping that first pack and immediately going to this pack on the left side.
Yep, no variations here. We were talking about a little bit earlier on in the broadcast about some teams liking to go right here, but not happening here. Both teams opting for that Ardenweald wing first. But Perplexed, man, they are just so clean with their pulls, right? I think that's one of the things that we've always praised Divinefield for in the past few years, is that he's one of the best tanks at just mob control, right? Having everything stacked together allows your DPS to do much more damage in general, right? Making sure you're in the flame patch, making sure you're not kiting around your melee DPS, and you can see that they finished that first pull 5 to 10 seconds faster than Pitu's Angels. You know, that's the equivalent of 1 or 2 deaths on the death timer. And that adds up over the course of the dungeon. It's one of the reasons Perplexed is one of the better teams.
Yeah, definitely. Just saving a couple of seconds here or there really, really matters. As we can see that they're already gathered that first pull, as Pitu's Angels is still trying to run around getting all of those mobs. One thing as well to mention is that we have Inspired, so that means none of these ads are actually CCable, because there's like multiple Inspired mobs in this pack. That's why Divinefield is dropping so low, and you don't see like any stuns or rings coming out from the Windwalker, because it just doesn't work. But Divinefield just face tagging this trash so long long. You can see he's dropping incredibly low, but still manages. At some point, no, never mind. He's just never kiting. He's just standing in there, tanking the whole trash pack until it dies. This is incredibly dangerous for the tank. But if you manage to face tank it, then it helps so much for your DPS, as we talked about, as Syro mentioned. If you can keep everything inside the flame patch, if you can keep everything gathered up, you just gain so much damage, and that's why we saw him not even attempt to kite there. He knew he can survive this.
Well, and the crazy thing is, he didn't even proc his cheat death there. Like, he still has that available. So it was just very measured there. And what you can do, like, the crazy thing about that pull is if you look at the numbers there, the priest is only doing 60% of the healing that the tank is doing. That tank is built for tank. He's not built for DPS. So he's just incredibly tanky. It's so good. I don't think I've ever seen somebody heal that well since I saw Grom.
Yeah, I mean, look at the numbers. I mean, Grom would be jealous if he would see Divine Field building so tankily for this dungeon. But Pitu's Angels, I mean, look at them. They actually did this trash pull a little bit faster even, I think, than Perplexed, because they're up to 24% trash, so they pulled slightly more. And it looked like, because of how much later they were into this trash pull, that they actually finished it off a little bit faster. It could be that they maybe committed a little bit less cooldowns on the previous pull, on the very first pull, and then committed a little bit more on the second pull, and that's what caused the difference here in timings. But Pitu's Angels doing really well here on this one, as Perplexed is gathering up the mini boss in their pull as well.
Yep, I mean, Perplexed again, going for just a bigger pull and making sure they're playing safer here. And once again, the kiting from Divine Field is only really after the combust, right? When the flame patches are already pretty much gone, and you can see the difference in damage here. It's just they just pulled ahead in trash percentage based off of that one pull alone. So yeah, Perplexed is playing much more clean right now in this section of the dungeon. But P2's Angels, honestly, they're not that far behind.
Yeah, they're really not. I mean, you can see Perplexed now triggering their 40% pride. Divine Field dropping really low. Had to use pain suppression from Ryzen here on Divine Field to be able to keep him alive. Looks like Pitu's Angels are very close to trigger their 40% pride too, though. So definitely really close, a lot closer in this dungeon here than we saw in Necrotic Wake. Pitu's Angels definitely keeping up with those pulls and doing those like similar huge pulls as we see Perplexed doing here, as they're now fighting the pride with all of the trash, which is incredibly dangerous, of course, because there's so much tank damage and the whole group is also taking a huge amount of AoE damage from the pride. But if you can pull this off, like if you can do what Perplexed just did, that's such an insane time save. If you don't have to single target down the pride, like look at Pitu's Angels right now. They have to finish off this pride by itself. And of course, we know that if you have to finish off one single target without pulling anything else on top, that's incredibly inefficient. Most teams do it like that, though, because it's incredibly difficult to pull the pride on top of anything else. But Perplexed just managed to do that because none of these trash mobs are actually doing AoE damage in this area. They only do tank damage. So as long as the tank is fine and everyone single target focuses the pride and just cleaves the rest of the trash, then that's incredibly efficient. And that's why Perplexed just is ahead so far now because of this one trash pull here.
Oh yeah, I mean, they just pulled crazy far ahead here, right? They're just pulling this expedition perfectly. I don't know how more we can like enforce that, right? Like, Perplexed is just on another level compared to Pitu's Angels, and Pitu's Angels isn't even playing bad, right? They're just being a little bit less efficient with their pulls, and it really shows how much that gets you ahead here.
I would step lightly if I were you.
Yeah, definitely. We also see Perplexed use this strategy we've seen by other teams previously as well, where you just stand up this ledge here. We see Ryzen and actually it looks like it's just Ryzen standing on top, not having to go into those things that knock you into the air whenever the AoE is happening, because the AoE only happens in like a certain C-axis where the boss is right now. So if you stand on the top of this ledge, you basically never have to jump up, which is really nice for damage. And not really sure exactly why they choose to have Ryzen up instead of, let's say, the mage, but I guess the mage needs to be closer for shifting power and stuff like that, so it makes sense that he cannot stay up. And the rest is melee players, so.
Yeah, but I mean, melee are people. Okay, moving on to the second section of the dungeon here. Mechagon coming up. We're going to see Perplexed probably go for a similar strat that we've seen in previous cups here, where they just kind of deal with the trash all outside, they proc their third prideful, and then they'll just skip everything, right? They'll skip pretty much past everything and only deal with, I think, probably the slimes at the end of the hallway, if I remember properly. But of course, there's a lot of travel time on the other side, so we're going to see them running for about a minute here.
Yeah, if you can speed up the travel time somehow, that already helps you out a lot too, by the way. We've seen some interesting things to speed up this travel time. We've seen the pre-scripts being used properly. We've seen the Night Fae, what is it called? The Soul Shape being used perfectly as well to be able to just catch up some time here, because travel time is also really important to min-max. We see them pull an Enraged Spirit. Not really sure if it looks like it was intended. Yeah, there we go. So it looks like they intentionally pulled this, but they were just like running for a little while without damaging it. Now these Enraged Spirits can be really dangerous, of course, because of the Rage cast, but it looks like it shouldn't be a problem for them as it is tyrannical, so the Enraged Spirits don't have as much HP, and there's also no affixes that make this harder. There's no raging or anything like that, so definitely should be okay here, but they actually do get a second cast.
They do get a second cast, but of course it dies in the middle of the cast, and not to worry about that. And they're also able to pull some trash on top of it right at the very end, so they maybe get a little bit of cleave value, but it was pretty much already dead by the time they had pulled it, right? So maybe not too efficient there, but they tried to drag the mask around as well, so they're at least trying to be a little efficient with it. It's just a little bit unfortunate with their timings here. Pitu's Angels is going to get a little bit of a fortunate lineup because they're a little later on. They're going to be able to pull this trash on top of the mask, so they get a little bit of efficiency saved here. They're going to be able to AoE that down on top of the Spirit, and now Perplexed is opting to use their Shadow Melds here, it looks like, to skip. Usually we'll see teams have their tank run off to the sides, their team walks by, and then only the tank casts a Shadow Meld, but looks like Perplexed is just opting to have everyone use their Shadow Melds here.
Yeah, it looks like it. It's possible that they skip even more. Maybe they just skip this whole area? Yeah, it looks
Seems
like they're just skipping this whole area. Definitely,
Seems
yeah.
a little dangerous.
You see Ryzen dropping really low there. That was actually really dangerous. So you see them just shadow melting off the aggro there and just skipping not only the trash pack in front of this wing, but also the first couple of trash groups at the start of this wing. So very risky strat. But I can totally see how this is a time save, right? If you don't need your tank to go to the side, it takes a while for the mobs to walk away, and then you walk up. So definitely riskier. But if it works out, like it worked out for Perplexed, then definitely a time save. So well done for them to be able to pull this off. And now proccing their 60% pride as well, using their Invis potions here. Okay, so definitely very, very efficient. First using the Shadow Melt to skip the trash, and then using the Invis. Oh no, they spawned it too close. Yeah, they're in combat.
Too close. Yep, there
it's
it
now
is.
Snapping to them, yeah.
They're just gonna have to cleave this down with the boss. That thing's gonna be at like 15 stacks by the time they get it there too, so they're just gonna have to kill it here. A little unfortunate, but in the end they should be able to deal with this. I guess we can't really see the Rapture cooldown for Ryzen here, so we don't really know if they have the cooldowns available for it. And he is Vinther, I believe. No, he's actually Night Fae in this dungeon, so yeah, we'll see how he's gonna be able to deal with this. They don't have Combust available. They don't have any major cooldowns available because they'd like to save that for the boss. You can see the Disc Priest bubble coming out as well as the AMZ from the DK. But that Prideful is still at half HP. They're going to be taking a lot of damage here as this keeps ticking up.
Yeah, I mean, this is not something they planned on actually playing. So that's why they don't have any of those cooldowns available that you would usually see on a Pride being used, like maybe a Combust from the Mage, for example. But they did manage to just use the Touch of Death to be able to finish that one off. Didn't have to use any major offensive abilities, thankfully. But yeah, just a little bit of a mistake here by Perplexed. And they also wasted their invisibility potions, right? Because everyone had to use that potion to skip it. And then since they were in combat with it anyway, they all basically wasted their potions. So definitely a little bit of a mistake here. But Pitu's Angels, on the other hand, they're playing quite a bit of trash compared to Perplexed just skipping this whole area. So definitely means they're going to be a little bit behind on their side, but they will have more trash percentage. But if you look at the trash defense, it's only 5%. That's not actually that big of a deal.
Yeah, not at all. Like the trash percentage is going to be made up by probably the trash in front of Hikar, or maybe those two, what are they called? I can't remember. The two guys that they skipped in front of this section. So yeah, the trash percentage isn't going to be too big of a deal, right? They can make that up really easily because they're pretty much an entire half of a boss ahead. And remember, this is tyrannical, which, yes, it's nerfed, but it's still 30% more boss HP. So that's a lot of HP to chew through on a plus 18. So I'd say even with that 5% trash advantage difference, Perplexed is still very solidly in the lead. Not to mention we also have those 2 deaths on the board for Pitu's Angels.
Yeah, definitely still Perplexed that are ahead here. Still a lot of things that can go wrong. So we'll see. They still have to do Hakar, which can cause some issues since, of course, it is tyrannical. And it can quickly get out of control if you don't have enough damage to finish the boss off before a certain amount of blood shields. So we'll see how they're going to be dealing with that boss later on, as they're still dealing with Millhouse first. This boss also can cause some issues, especially if you finish off one boss too quickly while the other boss is still high HP, because then you end up not having those stuns that you need to be able to interrupt those AoE effects that they're casting. But it looks like Perplexed has pretty even damage. Millhouse now on 15%, while Maleficent is on 33. So even if Millhouse goes down here, they should be able to finish off Maleficent before she starts casting that AoE. So well done by them, splitting up their damage to not have everything on one boss and nothing for the other. So well done. And other than that, really not too much issues on this boss that I can see happening.
Yep, for sure. They should just be able to finish this off easily. Only 8% more of the boss's HP to get through, and they'll be on to the last section of the dungeon here, that car wing. A little bit of trash to deal with before they get there, but Perplexed has been playing perfectly again. And to mention again as well, they have had so many zero-death dungeons so far in the past couple of cups, and they're on pace to have another one here. And even then, in that previous Necrotic Wake that they did, they were on board. Like, I think any other team, maybe besides Echo, would have had a full team wipe there when Divide Field went down, but they were able to hold it to 2 deaths. So they're just playing super clean right now, Perplexed is.
Yeah, they're definitely doing a really good job. Looks like they're actually ended up dealing with that trash after all. So it really looks like Ryzen dropping really low as they're actually tanking the AoE from this mob. This is something that we usually see them just line of sight, this huge AoE channel, but it looks like they were just focusing it down to kill it while it's channeling the AoE and not line of sighting it. So they're just believing in the damage, dropping that disc bubble and the pain sub by Ryzen to be able to survive the AoE channel, to not lose any sort of damage by line of sighting that cast. That is actually incredibly risky, but it's they pulled it off. And one thing to note as well is that trash that they just played, that's the trash they skipped earlier. So the only reason they skipped it earlier was to get better Pride timings, so they're able to invest it off later on. Unfortunately, the invest didn't work out, but the strategy itself is really, really nice if they do it properly. So I really, really like this invest Shadow Meld / strategy that they did there.
These Shadow Meld skips that Perplexed is going for are just kind of crazy. They just went all the way from the entrance of the Mechagon room to the entrance of the Kakar room. They Shadow Melded off the 2 Berserkers, the 1 Mask, and then that massive pull right in front of this section of the area as well. They're going for some pretty crazy Shadow Meld skips here, and it's working off for them as well. Like, they're going to be proccing their 4th Prideful here, and they'll probably end up using it as well and killing it for that buff for Hakar, because Hakar is still a very difficult boss on plus 18. They're probably also going to commit their 2nd Bloodlust to it, too.
Yeah, and it looks like that was really close on those devoted before they managed to get their cast off. But if you see in the back, they actually CC'd the inspired mobs. So they pulled everything except the inspired mobs on top. And I assume they are just not going to deal with those priests at all and just Shadow Melt off the aggro later after the boss. And they also used their Mind Soothe on the first trash mob. You see one trash mob is there at the entrance still. That one is not even in combat with the players because they used Mind Soothe. So they skipped that trash pack, and the other inspired mob they just used the Imprison on from the Demon Hunter. And I assume they're just going to be Shadow Melting it off after the boss, I guess.
I like the confidence there from Ryzen, knowing that he'd finish off that Power Word Radiance cast before he got blissed by 3 tornadoes at the same time, but knowing he was fine because he got the Radiance off. It's just funny to see him being like, yep, I'm going to get hit by this, but I'll get the heal off beforehand. Oh my god, look at P2's Angels here dropping stupidly low from that Prideful that they just dealt with on top of the AoE pack, but they're able to get through it just fine. And yeah, Shadow Mode skip barely pulled off for them. That was pretty scary for them.
Yeah, it looks like Perplexed though also having some issues with this Pride, as Ryzen is really low on mana and none of the damage dealers committing any major cooldowns for this one. Looks like we didn't even use the Touch of Death. I think Swagfish just went backwards to be able to in-cap that inspired mob there. So using another CC to be able to just ignore that mob. And now we use Bloodlust. They used the Bloodlust on this one with the Pride, so they're just completely nuking this boss. Hakar, as we talked about earlier, really a boss that can go out of control really easily if you don't have enough damage to finish him off before a certain amount of blood barriers. Because as soon as you have a blood barrier that is half the HP of the boss, then you won't be able to get through that anymore. So definitely a timer on this fight. They want to make sure they finish it off really quickly before that next blood barrier. But the boss is just melting. Look at the percentage. It's just so much damage from a Shine here on that Unholy DK, using all of those offensive cooldowns and probably the PI as well.
Yep, for sure. And the boss is going to die before that second blood barrier easily for Perplexed. Not a care in the world as the boss goes down for them. Really, all they have left now is to deal with this final bit of trash. And I wonder what strategy they're going to end up going with here. We've seen a couple different strategies, right? I would guess with them being at 85% trash, they're probably going to deal with both of these trash packs with the boss. Or maybe they'll just deal with this first trash pack that they skipped earlier. And then they'll have to deal with the second trash pack at the very start of the instance while they're in the final phase of Wazala. I think that's what we ended up seeing from some of the faster times last cup. And I wouldn't be surprised to see Perplex go with that strategy because it is the faster strategy, and they're obviously one of the best teams in our tournament.
Yeah, so it looks like they did SS that Shadow Melt off the aggro from this inspired map after the boss, after Hakar. And then they used the Mind Soothe by Ryzen to just navigate past those inspired mobs that they still had up there. So very well done. It really seems like they perfectly calculated the trash that they need here. They realized they don't need those inspired mobs, and it's just taking them too long to finish them. So they just skip it, as they're now finishing off this pack that they left earlier, where they just Shadow Melted past. And yeah, it's just Mistella left. And you look at the time, right? It's 18 minutes as they're pulling this boss. And they did not play this dungeon as intended. They made a mistake with the inspired mob, so that cost them probably a minute, I would say. So they would be even faster if they didn't make this mistake. I really like their whole route here. It looks like they really thought about this route, and it looks like it's really quick.
Yep, for sure. And I think it's all going to come down to whether or not they're able to deal with that last trash pack cleanly with the final phase of the boss. They've done it before. They can do it again. The thing I don't remember is if there's any really nasty inspired mobs in that first trash pack. I can't remember off the top of my head whether or not. We'll have to keep an eye on that as we move forward here. But of course, they have to get through the intermission phase cleanly first. And we've seen some teams have an issue with it. Remember, it was Miraz from Echo who was unable to kill his ad. I hate to keep ragging on him for it, but it's such a weird mistake for them to make. I don't think Miraz is the kind of guy who'd ever make that mistake, in this scenario. But it happened, and now we have to keep an eye on it because it's been an issue for some other teams.
Yeah, I mean, the way these players are min-maxing their damage, right? Sometimes you might think, oh, I only need this offensive cooldown for the mirror image, and then I can use the other cooldown on the boss. So if you calculated it too risky and it just doesn't work out that you have enough damage here, then it's totally possible that they don't make it. But let's see if Perplexed is making any of those mistakes as they're trying to finish off these images. Of course, Ryzen going with Divine Field, the healer and the tank going to one image, while the 3 damage dealers are going to 1 each, and they should all be having enough damage. Ryzen already going next to the totem here to be able to click it immediately as soon as the image goes down, and it looks like it looks like everyone did manage to finish with the totem. You can see the swirly into the middle. If the totem did not survive, it looks like all of them made it. And now we'll see if they manage to finish off this trash pack, because looks like there's an inspired mob in there as well.
Yeah, one of the Bone Soldiers is inspired, but really all that means is those cultists are going to be firing off Dark Lotuses a lot, so you have to keep an eye on the ground AoE here, but as long as you're able to dodge those, it shouldn't be too big of an issue. I think what they want to do is they want to make sure they kill off both of those cultists before the boss starts his I can't remember the name of the ability, the phase where he starts punching the ground and does this. But of course, because if you get those Dark Lotus casts going off while you have to dodge to the left or right as well, it can be a little bit of a pain. But of course, they dealt with the AoE before they even got to this section of the fight, so they don't have to worry about that at all. And yeah, again, they're just playing perfectly. And of course, the last 2% trash they did is at the top of the stairs there, which looks like Wolf Disco is going to tag right now. You can see the Alter Time going off. Those trash mobs should be coming in any second now.
Yeah, just really well done by Perplexed. You can see those Bone Soldiers and the cultists coming in. That's the last percentage they need, so they are just skipping that last pride. And as you mentioned, 0 deaths on the board. So even though they did make the mistake with the pride, they still have 0 deaths. So very clean run by them, except this one mistake they did. And another thing I wanted to mention about Perplex is they have gotten so well at recovering from any sort of mistake they did. Because we see those MDI teams have those crazy strategies and mistakes happen, right? But depending on how well you can recover from those mistakes, the better you are as a team. And Perplexed really grew into that team that is just so good at just adapting on the fly, improvising, and recovering. So really well done by Perplexed, as they're just now about to finish off Musala and winning that first game against Pitu's Angels 2-0.
That's right, Perplexed taking the victory, learning from some of their mistakes there, and again, like you mentioned, not having any crazy deaths, crazy mistakes, but it definitely shows there's even further upside for this team as they take that 2-0 victory in the other side here, Dranos.
Yeah, and credit to Pitu Angels. They were a boss fight behind Perplexed here in a dungeon that is really strong dungeon for Perplexed. Not a bad outcome by any stretch. I mean, this was a match where they were heavily underdogs, and I think they acquitted themselves well. So I'm looking forward to see what they can do in the lower bracket. But yeah, I mean, the story here is Perplexed with another fantastic the other side run.
Yeah, and